Well, one of the benefits of social separation in this time is that you get to enjoy the beautiful outside. And so we're going to have Bible study out on the lanai. Well, one of the reasons why we're doing this is because my house is really busy right now. My wife is in the office with Zoom meetings for school. My daughter is here from UCF, and so she's got to do things online. And so we got people all over the place. And so I said, well, it's a beautiful morning. I'll come outside and we'll do Bible study this week outside. I hope that this finds you having a wonderful week. I know this is hard. This is a really weird time. This morning when I got up, of course, I turned on the news, which I know I probably shouldn't do, but I did anyways. And I saw 6.6 million people applied for unemployment last week, and that's 10 million people in 2 weeks. And so I know that this is hitting close to home to many of you who are watching this. And so my prayers go out for you and your needs and things that are happening in your life. And this half hour that we're going to spend together studying the Word of God hopefully will be something that will lift you up, something that will take you away from your struggles and your trials. Hopefully will bring God into focus, bringing your relationship with Jesus into a focus for you as you go through this trying time, wherever you happen to find yourself and whatever you happen to be dealing with. And so with that thought, I hope that and pray that you have a Bible handy, maybe a writing utensil or something that you can take notes on. Just open yourself up. We're going to have a little word of prayer, and we're going to get started, and we're going to kind of pray to separate ourselves from the world for just a few minutes. I know there's a lot of things going on, and those things will be there in about a half hour when we get done with this study. But I'm going to pray now for us to be open to God's Word, to be open to the Spirit, to be open to a distraction, so to speak. Let's join together and pray. Now, Lord, as we study this Word, we thank you. We thank you for the small gifts in life. We thank you for family. We thank you for friends. We thank you for the gift of technology. And we pray that in this moment that we spend opening your word, that we are taken away from the struggles, we're taken away from the trials, and we're transported into a place where we will learn and we will grow. Pray for revelation today. I pray for something new to be revealed. I pray for a seed to be planted and for it to be nurtured and so it can grow. And we pray it in the name of Jesus. Amen. So we are continuing in the Gospel of Mark, and we're going to be in chapter 12. And we're going to be looking at verses 13 through 17. And this is a passage, my NIV translation has a title that says, Paying the Imperial Tax to Caesar. So it's about taxes, kind of appropriate, even though it's been overshadowed by the coronavirus. It is tax season, and many people are in the process of working out their taxes, and so very appropriate. This is a story that goes on again in Holy Week. We still find ourselves in the midst of Holy Week. We're on Tuesday, and Thursday's coming. Thursday will be the night for the upper room and the betrayal. Friday will be the crucifixion, the death, and then of course Sunday will be the resurrection and the Holy Week. Now, kind of appropriately, we're coming into the week before Palm Sunday. So we're not quite at the same place in Bible study as we are in worship, but we're close. And so here we're going to be picking up with this story. Again, another encounter between Jesus and the leaders of the church. Last week we took a look at this parable, this story of the vineyard that Jesus taught. And we talked about the fact that Jesus is now in a place where he's trying to get his disciples and the people to understand what's really going on here, what's happening. And this is hard because of perspective. We have a perspective that dictates how we understand things, how we input information. And many times our perspectives are influenced by the things that we learn, the things that we hear, the friends that we have, the jobs that we do. All of those things influence our perspectives. And so when we take a look at this concept of the perspective in Holy Week and for the Gospel of Mark, we see several different layers that we have to unpack. The first one is the relationship of Jesus as Messiah. As we've started, or as we have gone through this Bible study in Mark, we have come to it with a knowledge and understanding of who Jesus is. Now, if you are coming to this study cold and you don't know who Jesus is, then through the process of this gospel, you start to learn about the fact that he is the Son of God and that he can do miracles. He can exorcise demons. He can bring people back to life. He can multiply the loaves and the fish. There's so many things that he can do, and so you learn a lot about him. And it's the same thing with the disciples. The disciples are watching and walking with Jesus and learning all about him. But they come to it, just like all of us do, they come to the story with a perspective. And their perspective is that the Messiah was someone that was going to come, be the military king, to kick Rome out. Remember, Israel is being occupied by the nation of Rome, the empire of Rome. And they have been under their thumb for as long as they can remember. And so they want them out, and they want to be ruling themselves. They want to be free. And so there's this desire, this perspective that the Messiah is going to make this happen. Well, into that pot is poured Jesus, and Jesus comes as a baby in a manger in Bethlehem. He comes as the son of a carpenter. He comes as someone who does not have any military aspirations. In fact, he hangs out with prostitutes, and he hangs out with tax collectors. He hangs out with sinners. And so there's this notion, this understanding that he is the Messiah, but him and his picture of the Messiahship, the way that he's living out, does not equal the way that we've learned. And so they're struggling with this, and they've been struggling full frontal with it since chapter 8. And they're still going through this process of trying to understand who this Messiah is. Now that it's Holy Week in the Gospel of Mark, we layer on top of that the people. And the people with the triumphant entry as Jesus came down the Mount of Olives, riding on the donkey, and they waved the palm branches, and they spread their cloaks on the ground, and they shouted hallelujahs, and this notion of the coming of the King. And that was Sunday, and now it's Tuesday in Holy Week, and Jesus has cleared the temple. Jesus has cursed the fig tree. There's things that have been going on, and now it's starting to get to a breaking point. The leaders are seeing a problem here, and they haven't liked Jesus up to this point. His ministry has been lasting 3 years, and they haven't liked him for 3 years. But now they really are struggling because he's full frontal. Like the old saying goes, you can get naked and howl at the moon out in a field, and I don't have to do much about it. If you get naked and howl at the moon in my living room, I've got to deal with it. And now he's in the living room of the leadership. He's in Jerusalem. It's Holy Week, and they've got to deal with it. So they have been trying to deal with it. They've been trying to trap him. Last week we studied a story where they came and they asked him a question, hoping to get him to give an answer that would either make him look dumb or it would turn the people against him, and it didn't work. He turned it right around on the leaders, and they looked bad. And so now we're going to pick up in a story today, and with the Markan tradition of the transitions, it's just going to go right into it. So according to Mark, the way that he wrote it, this is immediately right after the story that we looked at last week. We don't know the time frame, or did Jesus go get something to eat and come back and then they had this altercation? We don't know. But the way that Mark wrote it, it seems that it happens right after the story that we studied last week. And so we pick up in verse 13, and the Markan transition word for this one is later. Mark usually uses immediately or all of a sudden or at once. Now he says later, so we believe it's still the same day. They sent some of the Pharisees and Herodians to Jesus to catch him in his words. And so they, meaning the enemy, in the last story we had the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. They sent people. They came to Jesus and they tried to trap him. So we get the sense in verse 13 that those three groups, are now sending another set of people to go see him. And the two groups of people that he's sending are the Pharisees and the Herodians. Now, the Pharisees are leaders in the church. And the Herodians, I think, are the most interesting that we want to take a look at. First and foremost, the Pharisees and the Herodians on a normal day don't get along. They don't like each other. The Pharisees and the Herodians are two polar opposites on the political spectrum when it comes to the understanding of what it means to be a Jewish person under the power of Rome. The Herodians were, of course, people who were Jewish, but yet they favored the Roman occupation. They favored Rome being in leadership, and so they had a specific perspective about life because of the fact that they wanted Rome to be leaders. The Pharisees were the exact opposite. They didn't like Rome being in leadership. They wanted Israel to be their own independent country. And so they differed greatly on many issues. But on this one issue, they were bipartisan. On this one issue, they came together. Both of them saw Jesus as a thorn in their side. The Pharisees saw Jesus as a thorn in their side because they were the religious power in Jerusalem. They were the religious power in Israel. They were the last word, so to speak. The Pharisees, when it came to the Word of God, when it came to religion. And Jesus was kind of turning their teaching on their heads. And so they needed to get rid of him because he was filling the people's minds with things that they weren't teaching. So their power was being eroded by Jesus, so they needed to get rid of him. The Herodians, on the other hand, they had a problem with Jesus because Jesus was going to cause a revolt. Jesus was going to cause problems. Again, remember, the people in Israel at this time believed that Jesus as the Messiah would be a military king. He would be someone that would come in and overthrow Rome and make Israel a world power again. And so they didn't want Rome to be overthrown, so they saw him as a threat because he was going to cause revolution. He was going to cause war. And so they came to an agreement to get rid of Jesus because they both saw an enemy in him. Even though the enemy that they saw was different in its description, they still saw Jesus as an enemy. So later they sent some of the Pharisees and the Herodians to Jesus, and we have right here laid out in verse 13, to catch him in his words. To catch him in his words. So they came with a preconceived notion. They came with an agenda. And their agenda wasn't to learn from Jesus. Their agenda wasn't to see if Jesus really was the Messiah. Their agenda wasn't to bring good tidings. Their agenda was to catch him in his words. They wanted to publicly embarrass him. They wanted to publicly bring him out or call him out so they could have something that they could use against him. So they came with this notion of this background and this agenda of trying to trap him. Later they sent some of the Pharisees and Herodians to Jesus to catch him in his words. In verse 14, they came to him and said, "Teacher, we know that you are a man of integrity. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are, but you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth." Okay? Let's just stop right there for a second. Everything that they just said is correct. Everything they just said is right. Listen to them. "Teacher, we know that you are a man of integrity." Jesus is a man of integrity. "You aren't swayed by others." He definitely isn't swayed by others. "Because you pay no attention to who they are." Jesus doesn't play the political game. He's not one of those kind of people that says, well, since you are a Pharisee, since you are a leader, since you are a king, then I'm going to treat you differently than the peasant or the pauper or the crippled person on the side of the road. He doesn't treat people differently based on their social standing. "You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are, but you teach the way of God in accordance to the truth." And he does. He teaches the way of God according to the truth. Now, it's interesting because they are laying out all of these truths. And you can just shake your head and say, yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. I agree with that. And they are saying that. Now, the question is, do they really believe it? Believe it. And again, as we've talked about many times before, if you want to understand what someone believes, just follow them around and watch what they do. Our actions will always reveal our true beliefs. And so they are speaking the truth. But are they acting out the truth? They came to him and said, "Teacher, we know that you are a man of integrity. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are, but you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth." So that is the lead-in. The lead-in. "Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not?" So there's the question. The question that's trapped. Because remember, it said in verse 14, they came to catch him in his words. Well, how are they going to catch him in his words? They're going to catch him in his words by asking him a question that now he has to answer publicly. All right? And that's how they're trying to catch him in his words. Well, what was the whole purpose of the buttering up at the very beginning? Well, remember, this is all happening in a public setting. This is all happening if we take Mark at face value, because he hasn't given us a transition. This is happening in the temple courts. So there are lots of people around watching and listening. And so this altercation, this trapping, so to speak, is happening in the company of others. In fact, it's happening for the company of others. They're not doing this on their own. They're not calling Jesus aside and being alone with him one-on-one. They're doing this in front of the crowd because they want to sway the opinion of the crowd. Because remember, the crowd was cheering Jesus a couple days ago as he was coming down the Mount of Olives. And so they want to make sure that the crowd is the one that's being swayed here. Remember, they had the chief priests, the scribes, the Pharisees, the Herodians, the elders. They have all come to this situation in Holy Week, and their agenda's already done. They've already come understanding what they believe and come understanding what they want to do. Now they're trying to convince others to come along with them. So they're not seeking truth. They're not seeking to understand. They already know their truth. They already understand the way that they're going to understand. Now they're trying to get other people to fall in line. They're trying to get the crowd to agree. So when they come and they give all these platitudes, when they say to Jesus, we know that you are a man of integrity. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are, but you teach the way of God in accordance to the truth. Basically what they're doing is they're buddying up to the crowd because they know that the crowd is on Jesus' side. They know that they have egg on their face because of the last altercation that just happened where the chief priests, the elders, and the scribes had to go, I don't know. They had to basically answer Jesus with a really dumb look on their face and saying, I just don't know how to answer that question. And so they understand that the people are on Jesus' side at this time. So what is the best thing politically for them to do is to make it appear that they are on Jesus' side too. So they can relate to the crowd. And so these platitudes that they're sharing with Jesus in verse 14 aren't the truth in their mind. They're the truth in what they believe the crowd's mind. They're saying what they believe the crowd wants them to say so that they can make a connection, so that the crowd will be listening. So the crowd will start to let their guard down a little bit and say, oh, these guys are on our side. These Pharisees and Herodians believe in Jesus just like we believe in Jesus. So they let their guard down, and then they slide in the question that is the trap. Because remember in verse 13, they're trying to catch Jesus in his words. So the question that they ask him, is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? Okay, so let's just stop for a second and let's examine this question. We find ourselves in Holy Week. We find ourselves, and this is the week of Passover. This is the week where the Jewish community, the Jewish nation, comes together in Jerusalem to remember the freedom that they received in Egypt from slavery, the freedom that their forefathers did. So this was several hundreds of years ago, many generations prior. And they come every year to Jerusalem to remember it, to remember the Passover, to remember the night that God sent the angel of death into Egypt. And they put the blood of the lamb on their doorposts, and the angel of death passed over their homes and did not hurt them, but yet did not pass over the homes of anybody who didn't have the lamb's blood on the doorpost. And so the firstborn male of every family, firstborn male of all the livestock, they all died that night. And so this was the final plague that prompted Pharaoh to say to the Israelites, go, leave, you can be free. And so Moses led them out of Egypt. And so they come together every single year in Jerusalem and they celebrate this Passover. And this Passover celebration over the years has gotten attached to it this notion of saying that when the Messiah comes, when the one comes that's going to set us free from Roman occupation, it's going to happen at Passover. So there was this added bonus, so to speak, when people came to Jerusalem at Passover saying, is this going to be the year? Is this going to be the year that the Messiah shows up? Well, when Jesus comes down the Mount of Olives on the Sunday at the beginning of the Passover week, riding on the donkey, and people are waving their palm branches and spreading their cloaks and shouting hallelujah, then that was a clear message saying, this is the year. This is the time, because here comes the Messiah. And so we have this notion and this understanding of this juxtaposition of the Passover celebration, the coming of the Messiah, the release from captivity from being slaves, and now we have this question that's been presented to Jesus that deals with the Romans. This is not a spiritual question. This is not a question about whether or not to believe in God, whether or not to follow God's commands. This is a question about the relationship with the occupier, the relationship with Rome. And they ask the question, is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? So first let's take a look at the question. Is it right? Is it right? They didn't say, should we? Or they didn't say, should we not? They said, is it right to pay taxes. So that means that there's a definition of right and wrong. So they're basically putting Jesus into a place where he's got to make a decision, he's got to make a call on right or wrong. Once you get someone into a situation where they're making a decision between right and wrong, then you can get them, so to speak, because you have an argument prepared for either way they go. If you put somebody in a position where you say, is it right or wrong, then you're saying in your mind they're going to answer yes, it's right, or no, or no, it's not right. Yes, it's right, or yes, it's wrong. And you prepare your response for those two answers. And so they have, again, they probably spent a lot of time thinking about this question. They probably planned it out a great deal, and they said, okay, this will be the question that we'll get him, because he can only go one or two directions. He can either say yes, it's right, or he could say no, it's wrong, and we can get him either way. And so they said, is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? So is it right to pay basically the taxes? The imperial tax was a tax that was charged, was levied on all non-Roman citizens. So these are all people that live in countries that were occupied by the Roman Empire, and those people who were not born Roman citizens, they had to pay a tax every year to the emperor. It's an imperial tax that they had to pay. And it was basically something that you had to do. If you didn't do it, then you had the Roman army show up at your door and they'd kill you. So you had to pay this tax. And it was something like an occupier's tax. Roman citizens didn't have to pay it, only the people who were occupied. So basically, almost everybody that was hearing this question were people that had to pay this imperial tax. And let's be honest, taxes are something that bother us. We struggle with taxes. We struggle with the fact that we have to pay taxes. Even though all of us enjoy the benefits of taxes, we struggle with the notion of paying taxes. And it's been the same since the beginning of time, and it was the same back in Jesus' day, that they struggled with paying the taxes to the empire, because this was an empire that was ruling over them. This is an empire that was commanding them and making them do things that they didn't want to do. And if they didn't do it, there was a point of a spear that was sticking into their chest. So they had to do it, or they were going to die. And so this imperial tax was somewhat of a sticky wicket, so to speak. It was something that all the people in the crowd that were listening to were affected by, and all of them had very strong opinions. You doubt you would find anybody in Jesus' day, if you could be the man on the street and have a conversation, say, what do you think about the imperial tax? And then go, no, I never think about it. No, it was usually one way or the other. The Herodians, they loved the imperial tax. They thought it was the least that they could do for having the protection of the Roman Empire, for having the prosperity of the Roman Empire. The Pharisees, on the other hand, would have been against the imperial tax, because they said, we're paying taxes to a heathen, we're paying taxes to an emperor that believes that he's God, and so basically we were participating in sin as we pay this tax. So you have all of these extremes that are coming together. But basically everybody in the crowd is affected by this imperial tax, and the majority of people who hear the question would say in their mind, no, let's not pay the imperial tax, let's revolt, let's stand up against the imperial tax. And remember, they came to this understanding, they came to this Holy Week believing that the Messiah was going to be a political king. The Messiah was going to be a military king. The Messiah was going to be the one who was going to overthrow Rome. So you combine all that together, when they hear the question asked, then they're saying in their mind, this is where he's going to take a stand. He's going to take a stand against the imperial tax, and he's going to rally us together, and we're going to revolt against Rome. And so they asked them the question, is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? Should we pay or shouldn't we? That old song, should we stay or should we go? Should we pay or shouldn't we? So they've asked a very clear question, and they have shaped the question in such a way that they believe that Jesus can only answer one of two ways. Yes, we should pay. No, we shouldn't pay. And so they have kind of painted him into a corner, so they think. So let's keep on looking. Verse 15, should we pay or shouldn't we? But, and always pay attention to the buts in the Bible, Jesus knew their hypocrisy. Jesus knew their hypocrisy. Where was their hypocrisy coming from? The hypocrisy was coming from many different locations. The first hypocrisy that they were coming from is that they didn't believe Jesus was the Messiah. They didn't believe that Jesus was who he said he was. That was their hypocrisy. So they were talking out of one side of their mouth, but believing out of the other side of the mouth when they were saying, we know that you're a man of integrity. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are, but you teach the way of God in accordance to the truth. They were lying. They don't believe any of that. They believe that he's a crazy, maniacal heretic. They don't like him. They don't want him around. They know they have that hypocrisy. He also knows that the hypocrisy that they're saying, because they're trying to trap him. They're asking him a question, pretending to say, we really want to know. We really want to understand. When that's not the case. They don't really want to know. They don't really want to understand. They're just trying to trap him. So he understands their hypocrisy. But Jesus knew their hypocrisy. Why are you trying to trap me? He asked. And then he said something very interesting. He said, bring me a denarius and let me look at it. Bring me a denarius, or a denarii, and let me look at it. A denarii is a coin. It's a Roman coin. And on one side there would have been an image of Caesar, and the other side would have been another image of Caesar sitting on a throne. And basically this would have been money. This would have been like a day's wages, a denarii in the Roman Empire. And so he asked for someone to bring him that money. Now, he's not asking for it because he needs the money. He's asking for it because he wants to show something. Now, stop for a moment and think about where the Pharisees and the Herodians must be. The Pharisees and the Herodians were feeling pretty good about their possibilities, or their opportunity to trap him in front of everybody. And so they come and they ask him this question. And once they ask him the question, they're probably high-fiving each other and sitting back and crossing their arms and saying, go ahead, answer this one. But then Jesus throws it back at them and asks them to give them a very common piece of Roman money. So basically it would be like someone now saying, hey, give me $1 bill. And so give me a denarii. So, but Jesus knew their hypocrisy. Why are you trying to trap me? He knows what they're trying to do. He knows that they're trying to trick him. Now remember, who's listening? All of the crowd is listening. His disciples are listening. And so now all of a sudden they're saying, what do you mean they're trying to trap me? They're trying to trick me. Because they're like, weren't they just praising you? Weren't they just singing your praises? But they're starting to understand through Jesus' teaching that there's something else going on here. There's something below the surface. But Jesus knew their hypocrisy. Why are you trying to trap me, he asked. Bring me a denarii and let me look at it. Bring me a denarii and let me look at it. Does anyone really believe that Jesus doesn't know what a denarii looks like? Of course. It's like saying, do you know what a dollar bill looks like? Of course you know what a dollar bill looks like. You've seen it before. You've held it in your hand. You've used it many a time. And it's the same way with Jesus. Jesus has used a denarii in his life. He's 33 years old. He's very accustomed to denarii. And everybody else is very accustomed to it too. But he wants to have it. He wants to use it as a symbol. He wants to use it as a teaching moment. And so he says, bring me a denarii and let me look at it. So in verse 16, they brought the coin and he asked them. He brought the coin and he asked them a question. Again, they proposed a question to Jesus. Their question was, should we be paying the imperial tax? Should we pay it or should we not pay it? Is it right to pay the imperial tax? They've asked a question. Jesus now responds to that question with a question. If you haven't learned anything at all about Jesus and confrontation or conflict, you should glean this, and that is that when you find yourself in a conflict situation, instead of attacking, instead of trying to answer the question right off, stop for a moment, take a step back, and ask a question. Ask some clarifying questions. That's a good thing for us to do, is when we find ourselves in an argument with our spouse, when we find ourselves with an argument with someone at work, when we find ourselves in a conflict situation. It's a very good practice to get into the practice of asking questions. And so Jesus asked for the coin, and he asked this question. They brought him a coin, and he asked them, whose image is this, and whose inscription? So he has the coin. He asked them, said, whose image, whose picture is on here, and whose inscription is on here, meaning whose name is on here. And so it's like a dollar bill. You pull out a dollar bill and you say, who's on a dollar bill? Well, George Washington's on a dollar bill. Whose image is on here? Whose inscription is on here? And so whose image is this and whose inscription? Caesar's, they replied. And remember, it's not only the Pharisees and the Herodians, even though he's having the conversation directly with them, but it's also the crowd. I mean, the crowd probably was listening to this, and when he said, whose image is this, they said in their mind, oh, it's Caesar's image. And maybe some of them had a denarii with them, and they pulled it out. They were looking at it as he was looking at it. And he says, whose image is this? And he says, they say Caesar. Now, this is important that he asked the question. Look at your translations. In verse 16, do you have him asking the question, whose image is this? Take a look at that. Whose image is this? This is important because if you remember from back in Genesis, from Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, humans are created in the image of God. Those are the words from Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. that we are created, men and women are created in the image of God. And we've had many conversations in our life about this concept of image and what image means. Well, Jesus in this specific case is talking about a picture on a coin. That's an image. But also, too, we understand that image is so much more than just a picture. An image is our very being, or who we are. You can see someone and that's their image. But also, too, their image is their being, is their personality, it's their perspective, it's how they're wired. That's a part of their image, too. And as human beings, we understand from Genesis that we are created in the image of God. Not that we look like God, but that we are made up of God, that we are created in God's being, that we are created in the image of God. In this specific instance, Jesus says, whose image is this and whose inscription? We know specifically he's not asking whose being is this or whose identity is this. He's saying, whose picture is that? Who's that person? And they say Caesar. So it's Caesar's image, Caesar's picture, but he uses the term image. He doesn't say whose picture is this. He says whose image is this, which is a direct relationship back to Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. Caesar's, they replied. In verse 17, then Jesus said to them, give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. Listen to that reply again. Then Jesus said to them, give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. Now remember, what's the question that the Pharisees and the Herodians have asked? The question that the Pharisees and the Herodians have asked is, way back in here in verse 14, is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? So they're asking a question about taxes and taxation, and is it right to pay? And they're thinking in their mind, we've got him, because remember, we talked about, they planned this question out. They believed that there was only a yes or a no. Yes, it is right to pay taxes, or no, it's not right to pay taxes. And they figure they have him either way for the crowd. If he says, yes, it is right to pay taxes, then they are able to turn that towards the crowd and say, see, this man favors Rome. This man wants us to stay in bondage to the Romans. If he says no, then they can turn towards, not the crowd, but turn towards Rome and say, look, this man is trying to overthrow your authority. This man is trying to cause a revolution, trying to cause a revolt. And either way, they believe that they can sow the seeds of discontent and they can get rid of this guy. So they think they have him. But what does Jesus do? Jesus turns it around back at them and asks them to take a look at the denarii. Whose picture's on the denarii? It's Caesar's picture on the denarii. And so he hands it back to them and says, okay, then give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God's what is God's. He adds a totally separate layer to this. What is he saying? Is it right to pay taxes? Give to Caesar what is Caesar's. Is it right to pay taxes? Give to Caesar what is Caesar's. Should we not pay taxes? He doesn't say that. Does he say to pay taxes? He doesn't say that either. He says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. That's Caesar's coin. It's his picture. It's his name. Give it back to him. And then he adds, give to God what is God's. And remember, we said that it was important that he used the word image in verse 16. Whose image is this? So, are you created in the image of Caesar? Are you created in the image of God? I'm not created in the image of Caesar. Everyone would agree to that. He said, well, then give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's. Meaning, give to Caesar your money, but give God yourself. Give God your life. You give God your life, then the rest of it doesn't really matter. The rest of it is not as important as the money. But yet, as human beings, we get so focused on the money. And so he says, then Jesus said to them, give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. Did he answer their question? Not really. He didn't really answer the question. He didn't answer, yes, it's right to pay taxes, or no, it's not right to pay the imperial tax. But he took the question and developed it into something so much bigger. And it's something that you and I wrestle with every single day. Today was no different. This morning when I got up and I turned on the news, I saw that 6.6 million people applied for unemployment this week. And you add that to the 3.5 million last week, you got 10 million people in 2 weeks that are applying for unemployment in this country. And there are a lot of people that are very, very afraid. Very, very afraid for what's going to happen to this economy. Very, very afraid what's going to happen in their lives. And it's understandable, totally understandable. And I would encourage you to take that fear, take that frustration, take that struggle that you're having, and take it into this passage and listen to the words of Jesus again. They brought him a coin, and he asked them, "Whose image is on this, and whose inscription?" "Caesar's," they replied. Then Jesus said to them, "Give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." There is nothing wrong with us being afraid about the financial future of our country, about our financial future as individuals. That's a given. There's nothing wrong with that. The question is that your full occupation? Is that something that is going to take over every aspect of your life? Are you forgetting that you're created in the image of God? Are you forgetting that God created you in his image? Are you forgetting that there's something so much more to life than just the financial ruin that's happening right now? There's so much more to life than just the coronavirus. Are you remembering this? And this is what Jesus is saying to the Pharisees and the Herodians, to the disciples and to the crowd on this Holy Week 2,000 some years ago, and what he's saying to us today. He's saying, I understand that what you're going through is hard. Now, Jesus is not saying the imperial tax is fair. He's just saying, rend to Caesar what's Caesar's, give to Caesar what's Caesar's, and give to God what's God's. You know, give the money. Don't worry about the money, because you have God. You have that relationship right. Everything else will take care of itself. You have the relationship with money right, but your relationship with God wrong, then you're going to be in trouble. And so, in this troubling time of economic uncertainty, what an important message for us is to understand that we've got to give it. We've got to give it over to God. Yes, you're losing your jobs. Yes, your incomes are going down. This is something that's happening all around the world right now. We know and we believe that it's going to come back. But until that time comes, you still have to live. You still have to eat. You still have to pay bills. You still have to buy gas. You still have to take care of your families. In those times, we have to understand that we need to lean into this notion of being created in the image of God. We've got to lean into this notion, this understanding that God is here, he's present, and we need to rend to him, to give to him what is his, and that's us. We need to say to God on a regular basis, I don't get what's going on, I don't understand what's going on, I have no control over what's going on, I need you. I lean into you. And that's what Jesus is saying to all the people in this Holy Week, that there's a difference between this money aspect and this spiritual aspect. And the difference is that we from now on need to take out of our vocabulary this concept of secular and sacred. Everything is sacred. Everything is sacred. If you're a follower of Jesus, then there's no longer secular. There's no longer worldly and sacred. There's no longer, of the world and in the world. And it is all sacred. It is all this process of saying who I am, what I do, how I live, how I respond. Everything is sacred. And so give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's. Don't do either or. Do both and. Do it both and. And here's where it gets really cool at the very end. Now remember, they came to trap him, as we have here in the beginning of this verse. They definitely came to trap him. Because it says here, later they sent some of the Pharisees and the Herodians, back up in verse 13, to Jesus to catch him in his words. So they came to trap him. And where do we end up in verse 17? And they were amazed at him. They were amazed at him. They weren't amazed. The Herodians and the Pharisees weren't amazed by what he taught. They weren't amazed by the revelation they just received. They were amazed at him because, remember, they've made up their mind. There's no changing their minds. They're convinced that Jesus is the enemy. They're convinced that Jesus needs to go. And so they're not trying to be open to his teaching. They're not trying to be open to a new revelation. They're trying to trap him. They're trying to arrest him. They're trying to get rid of him. And so it says here, they were amazed at him. They weren't amazed at his teaching. They weren't amazed at his insight. They weren't amazed at the revelation he just shared. They were amazed at him. They're like, how does he do this all the time? We think we get him, and then all of a sudden he's not there anymore. We think we paint him into a corner, and then all of a sudden he disappears. He outwits us. He outthinks us. He outsmarts us. And they were amazed at him. And so I think that is so telling at the end of this little story, that they weren't amazed at his teaching. They weren't amazed at his revelation. They weren't amazed at what they just learned. They're amazed at him because, again, they've already made up their mind. Their truth is already set in stone. They've already established what they're believing and where they're going and what they're going to do. And nothing is going to change their mind. Not even death and resurrection is going to change their mind. they're so convinced that this man needs to go that they were amazed at him. Not at his teaching, not at what he just revealed to them, but they were amazed at him because he outsmarted them again. Well, so that was Mark chapter 12, verses 13 through 17. That's where we're going to stop this week. I pray that you have a very safe week. I pray that your anxiety level is maintained through the Holy Spirit. I know these are tough times. This is tough times for all of us, whether it's economically or physical health-wise, socially, whatever the case may be. This is a tough time, and I pray that you find in these words a little bit of peace to know that even in the tough times, just focus on giving to God what is God's. Allow Him to take the wheel. Allow Him to control. God's got your back. He's going to take care of you. There might be some tough times between now and then, but He's got you. He's not going to let you fail. He's not going to let you crash and burn. There is a plan here. Don't understand it. Don't always see it, but God's up to something. So just be open to that this week. And well, until next week, when we pick up in verse 18 of chapter 12 of Mark, be praying for you and your family.